The drizzle had started before the sun broke through the clouds that morning, lending a cool crispness to the air. Elijah Lawson pulled the collar of his coat tighter around his neck and walked briskly down the street, his leather shoes splashing through puddles. He had no plans to be in this part of town, but a sudden detour and inexplicable urge led him here. The hospital's sterile white facade rose above the modest neighborhood, a reminder of the lives stitched together or quietly unraveled within its walls. Elijah was a man accustomed to efficiency and purpose, not one prone to whims. Yet here he was. As he crossed the threshold into the lobby, Elijah's mind swirled with work obligations, contracts left unsigned, calls to return. He reached for his wallet and realized he'd need to pay for a parking slip. He moved toward the kiosk but stopped when he noticed the scene unfolding in front of him. A boy, no older than 7, was perched on a cracked plastic chair, gripping his mother's hand as tightly as he could. His face was pale, the kind of pale that comes not from lack of sleep but something deeper, something that wore down on a soul too young to know the harshness of the world. The mother's voice trembled as she spoke to the clerk behind the glass partition. "Please, there must be a way. I'm trying everything. He can't wait much longer." The clerk's eyes softened, but she shook her head. "I'm so sorry. I wish I could do more. You've exhausted the charity fund. The hospital has to prioritize paying patients." The words echoed through the marble hallway, and Elijah felt his heart clench. He tried to move away, to leave these strangers and their private pain behind, but his feet wouldn't cooperate. Instead, they carried him forward. His voice surprised even himself. "Excuse me," he said, stepping up to the glass. "I'd like to cover the boys' expenses. How much do they need?" The mother turned, eyes wide with disbelief, and for a moment, the world seemed to still. Elijah took in the dark circles beneath her eyes, the threadbare sweater she wore despite the autumn chill, and the fragile glimmer of hope that flickered and threatened to vanish. She tried to speak, but words failed her. Tears welled and spilled down her cheeks. The clerk, equally shocked, fumbled for her keyboard and read out a number. It was high, more than Elijah had expected, but he nodded without hesitation. "Put it on my card," he said. As he swiped his credit card, he couldn't help but glance back at the boy. His small chest rose and fell with each labored breath. There was no moment for heroics, no room for second guessing. It was the kind of choice you made when faced with a child's life in the balance. The transaction completed. Elijah turned to leave, but not before the mother grabbed his hand. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I don't know how my name is Maria. My son, that's Leo. He's everything." Elijah squeezed her hand. "I'm glad I could help." He walked away before the weight of her gratitude could settle. He told himself it was a simple act, a line of credit, and a few minutes of his time. Nothing more. But weeks later, Elijah's life resumed its predictable cadence. Meetings, investments, endless negotiations filled his days. He didn't think of the hospital, the boy, or the woman whose eyes held a mix of hope and despair until he found the letter in his mailbox, handwritten, its edges frayed. No return address. He opened it on the steps of his townhouse, the autumn wind swirling around him. "Dear Sir," the letter began. "My name is Leo. You helped me and my mom at the hospital. I know you don't know me, but I wanted you to know I'm getting better now. I even played with my friends last week. My mom says we should keep moving forward, but it's hard sometimes. Anyway, thank you for what you did. When I get better, I'm going to help people too. That's what heroes do, right? Mom says you're a hero. I think she's right." The last sentence was scrawled unevenly, as if Leo's hand had been unsteady or his strength had waned. Elijah read it again and again, the words filling spaces within him he hadn't realized were hollow. He crumpled onto the steps, overwhelmed. It was just a letter, he thought. Just words on paper. But they carried a weight beyond their ink, and they refused to let him go. In the weeks that followed, Elijah tried to push the memory aside, to let it settle in the realm of things he did without needing thanks, but the letter followed him. He would glance at it in the evenings, as if the paper itself whispered of Leo's resolve and Maria's resilience. He found himself haunted by more than just their plight. He saw echoes of the boy he had once been, a boy who had also needed rescuing. One cold afternoon, Elijah decided to revisit the neighborhood around the hospital. He needed closure, or perhaps a deeper understanding of why this child, this fleeting act of charity, had burrowed so deeply into his chest. As he walked past corner stores and weather-beaten buildings, he saw a community that fought battles out of sight. People who carried on despite broken systems. He stopped outside a modest brick building that served as a community center. The laughter of children seeped through the cracks. Drawn by the sound, he stepped inside. Volunteers moved about with the urgency of people who cared deeply. They handed out food, read stories, helped with homework. Elijah's eyes swept the room until they landed on a familiar face. Leo was there, bundled up in a colorful scarf, his cheeks flushed with excitement as he drew pictures on a piece of paper. Maria sat nearby, speaking softly to a group of other parents. She glanced up and their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Leo spotted him. The boy's eyes lit up, and he scrambled over, nearly tripping on his own feet. "You came," Leo beamed, his voice carrying over the din. "Mom said you might one day." Elijah knelt to meet him at eye level. "How are you feeling, Leo?" "Better," Leo said with a proud smile. "Way better. I even started school again. I'm drawing you something." He held up a crayon drawing, a stick figure version of Elijah with a bright red cape. Elijah's throat tightened. He wanted to tell the boy he wasn't a hero, that he had only done what any decent person should, but the words didn't come. Instead, he hugged Leo, feeling the boy's warmth and determination like a fire that refused to be snuffed out. Over the next hour, Elijah watched as Maria navigated the center with quiet strength, organizing volunteers and offering help where it was needed most. She was a force, one that had clearly existed long before he had stepped into her life. And as he helped hand out supplies, Elijah realized that his decision to pay a medical bill had set him on a new path, one where small acts of kindness could ripple into something far greater. As the afternoon light began to fade, Elijah found himself staying longer than he had planned. Leo pulled him around the community center with childlike exuberance, introducing him to everyone he encountered. "This is my friend," Leo said each time, beaming with pride. Each introduction, each new face, chipped away at the walls Elijah had carefully constructed over the years. He'd long considered his success a solitary pursuit, built on ambition and resilience. But here, in a modest room filled with warmth and purpose, he felt something different: connection. Maria approached as Leo ran off to join a game of tag. She studied Elijah, a mix of gratitude and curiosity in her eyes. "I didn't think I'd see you again," she said softly, her words edged with the kind of exhaustion only a mother fighting for her child could know. "Neither did I," Elijah admitted. "But Leo, he wrote me a letter." Her eyes brightened. "He wanted to thank you. I tried to tell him he didn't have to, that some kindness doesn't need repayment. But he wouldn't listen." "Sometimes words matter," Elijah said. "They remind us why we do things." They fell into silence, watching as Leo darted between the other children, his laugh ringing out like a melody. Maria turned to him again, a hesitant smile on her lips. "You didn't have to come back, you know." "I know," he said. "But I'm glad I did." In the weeks that followed, Elijah became a regular presence at the community center. It started with small gestures, donating supplies, sponsoring activities, but soon he was helping coordinate fundraising drives and mentoring children. He found himself taking phone calls from volunteers late into the night, learning about each challenge the community faced. Each story he heard made him more determined to help, to be part of something larger than himself. One rainy evening, as Elijah prepared to leave after helping paint a new mural in the children's playroom, Maria called out to him. She was standing near the door, a steaming cup of coffee in her hands. "Do you have a minute?" He nodded, wiping paint from his hands. They sat at a small table, the hum of activity around them fading into the background. Maria's expression was serious. "I never really thanked you properly," she began. You didn't just save Leo, you gave us a chance to hope again. I've spent so long feeling like the world had no place for people like us, people who can't pay their way through every obstacle. Hope is powerful, Elijah replied, his voice low. I think Leo taught me that. He's strong because he's had to be, she said, staring into her coffee. But you've given him something more. He talks about the future now. Before, it was always the next treatment, the next bill. Elijah felt a wave of emotions crash over him. You're the one who fought for him. I just happened to be there. No, Maria said firmly. You chose to be there. When everyone else turned away, you didn't. They sat in companionable silence, the rain tapping softly against the windows. For the first time in a long while, Elijah felt at peace. He realized that his life built around contracts and deals had been missing something he couldn't name. Here, surrounded by stories of resilience and small triumphs, he had begun to rediscover a sense of purpose that transcended personal gain. Days turned into weeks, and Elijah's involvement deepened. The community came to know him not as the wealthy businessman who once paid a medical bill, but as someone who listened, who cared. He met families whose stories mirrored Maria and Leo's, people trapped in cycles of hardship but determined to press forward. They didn't need a savior, they needed allies. So he became one. One chilly morning, as Elijah helped organize a clothing drive, Leo ran up to him, waving a piece of paper. Look, he said, breathless. I got an award at school for helping other kids. I told them you taught me. Elijah took the paper, a certificate of recognition, and smiled. You did that on your own, Leo. I just gave you a little nudge. Leo's expression turned serious. Mom says I should always help people. Because when you do, it makes the world better. She says you made our world better. Elijah crouched down, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. Your mom is wise, she's right. The words lingered between them, filled with weight and promise. As Leo ran off again, Elijah stood, watching him go. It struck him how one small act and impulsive decision to cover a medical bill had transformed not just Leo's life, but his own. It wasn't about money. It was about human connection, about seeing each other through darkness. The community center continued to thrive. And with each passing month, Elijah found himself invested in projects he'd once considered outside his purview. He helped organize a scholarship fund, established a mentorship program, and even rallied his business contacts to contribute resources. It was exhausting work, often thankless, but every smile, every story of a life changed, was its own reward. One evening, as Elijah locked up the community center, he found another letter waiting for him. It was folded neatly and taped to the door. The handwriting was unmistakable Leo's. He opened it under the street lamp's glow, the words blurring as emotion welled within him. Dear Elijah, it read. I wanted to tell you I'm doing even better now. I'm going to help someone like you helped me. Mom says that's how we keep the good going. I hope you always remember how much you mean to me and everyone here. You're not just a friend, you're family. Elijah's hands trembled as he folded the letter. The air around him felt heavy and light all at once. Family. The word echoed in his mind, unlocking memories of a time he'd long buried when he, too, had been a frightened child in need of saving. Life had come full circle in ways he hadn't expected, and in the quiet of that evening he understood that the journey was far from over. But for now he would continue walking this path one act of kindness at a time. The letter stayed in Elijah's pocket, close to his heart, as he walked through the streets that night. The cool air was thick with the scent of fallen leaves, and the city lights reflected off rain-slicked pavement, creating a shimmering path before him. He moved slowly, feeling each breath fill his lungs, each step anchoring him to this moment. Family. It was a word he had avoided for so long, a word that brought with it memories of a childhood marked by loss and loneliness. Yet, here it was, redefined and given freely by a boy who had every reason to close himself off to the world. The next morning, Elijah awoke with a renewed sense of purpose. He dressed quickly, grabbed a thermos of coffee, and headed back to the community center. He had a meeting planned with a local foundation interested in funding their programs. But as soon as he arrived, Maria intercepted him, her face pale and stricken. "It's Leo," she said, her voice breaking. "He collapsed on the way to school. They took him to the hospital." The ground seemed to shift beneath Elijah's feet. Without a word, he took her hand and led her to his car. The drive to the hospital was a blur of red lights and unanswered prayers. When they arrived, they found Leo in a sterile room, his small form dwarfed by the hospital bed. Machines beeped and hissed, and the sight of him, so fragile, pierced Elijah's heart. The doctors explained that it was a complication from his previous condition, a setback they hadn't anticipated. Maria wept quietly by Leo's side, her fingers brushing through his hair. He thought of all the money he'd donated, all the hours he'd spent trying to build something good. None of it mattered if he couldn't help Leo now. As the hours stretched on, he stayed. When Maria needed to step out, he held Leo's hand, telling him stories about brave knights in magical lands. He promised that they would go on adventures together when Leo got better, even if he had no idea whether he could keep that promise. For the first time in years, Elijah prayed. Not for himself, but for the boy who had become a light in his life. Days passed. Leo's condition remained critical, but slowly, signs of improvement emerged. Each breath he took, each flicker of movement, was a victory. Elijah and Maria clung to these small milestones, supporting each other through exhaustion and fear. They shared stories of their pasts, Maria's childhood in a small town, Elijah's rise from a difficult upbringing. The walls between them crumbled, replaced by trust born of shared pain and hope. When Leo finally woke, his eyes fluttering open, the relief was overwhelming. Tears streamed down Maria's face as she kissed his forehead. Elijah squeezed the boy's hand, his voice rough with emotion. "You scared us, buddy." "Sorry," Leo whispered, a small, tired smile on his lips. "But I'm still here." In the days that followed, Leo grew stronger. The community rallied around him, offering support and care. Elijah realized that what they had built together wasn't just a center, but a family, a web of people bound by compassion and resilience. He saw it in the meals delivered to the hospital, the handmade cards from children Leo had befriended, the quiet moments of encouragement. One evening, as Leo rested at home, Maria asked Elijah to stay for dinner. It was a simple meal, pasta with homemade sauce, but it felt like a feast. They laughed and shared stories, the air filled with warmth and light. When Leo insisted on showing Elijah his collection of crayon drawings, Elijah marveled at each one. There was a new picture: Leo standing on a hill with a crowd of people, a red cape billowing behind him. "That's you," too, Leo said, pointing. "We're both heroes." Elijah swallowed hard, his voice thick. "I don't need a cape. I just need you to keep being brave." "I will," Leo said confidently. "Because I'm not alone." That night, Elijah walked home under a sky scattered with stars. The weight he'd carried for so long felt lighter. He'd spent years chasing success, believing it would bring fulfillment. But true success, he realized, wasn't measured in wealth or accolades. It was found in moments like this, in love, in connection, in lifting others. The next morning, Elijah stood before the community center, a smile playing on his lips as he watched families come and go. Maria joined him, holding a cup of coffee. "Ready for another busy day?" she asked. "Always," he said, feeling the truth of it in his bones. Leo bounded over, his laughter filling the air. Elijah scooped him up, feeling the weight of the boy's trust and hope. As they walked inside together, Elijah knew that life would continue to test them, but they would face it together. This was the real power of kindness, the ability to create ripples that touched lives in ways he'd never imagined. And as long as there was a chance to make the world a little brighter, he would keep going. Because family wasn't just about blood. It was about the bonds forged in moments of vulnerability, compassion, and love. And in this family, they would always find a way to carry each other forward.